Hello, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. And today we have a very special guest, Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. of Princeton University. He's the author of a powerful, and I might add, best-selling new book called Begin Again, James Baldwin's America and Its Urgent Lessons for Our Own. Eddie, thank you so much for joining us. I watch you every morning on Morning Joe. MSNBC guys, you'll see the same great books behind him every morning. So every morning I get my reset, what do we need to think about today? So thanks for being with us. And the book is just, such a wonderful look at life in America and at James Baldwin. And, as we always wonder, what would he think about us today? What do you think he would say?
Well, first of all, let me just thank you for inviting me back onto the show. I remember a few years back when we came to talk about democracy and Black, and here we are in 2020, still talking about race, still talking about the country struggling with the value gap, this belief that white people matter more than others. And, I've been thinking about Baldwin for about 30 years, and I decided to finally bring him from backstage onto the front stage, right? And think with him about our current moment. He left us about 7,000 pages of work. So I don't want to pretend as if I can put words in his mouth. What I do know is this, is that Baldwin he argued that, America refused to tell itself the truth. It refused to confront its ugliness, its genuine, its true history. And because it's addicted to its lies, right? We find ourselves over and over again on this racial hamster wheel. So here I am trying to figure out, what do we do with Trumpism? What do we do with the ugliness that is saturating our politics? Trying to deal with my own despair and disillusionment. So I reached for Baldwin. I reached for his work. I reached what he called the ruins. And there I found my book, Begin Again.
Right. You went to St. Paul de Vence, as did I. When I found myself in that area, and I said, I have to go to this place of creativity. So talk with us about, you were there actually as the house was being mostly destroyed, turned into apartments. Tell us about that.
It was a startling moment. I decided, I was in Heidelberg for a month teaching a class and delivering a lecture. And I decided to hop a flight over to Nice, and then got in the car on my way to my hotel, and I told the taxi driver, who wanted to practice his English, why I was in France. And he said, oh, you need to go now because there's a national party. I don't know what a national party is. And so we drove immediately. We did a U-turn and drove immediately to St. Paul de Vence. And then we walked up the street, and I saw the cranes and I heard the jackhammers. And when we got there, I saw just one side of the house there, kind of exposed to the sun as it was beating down on worn walls. And that's that look. I mean, he had this amazing kind of scene looking into the valley, and just above our head was the old village of St. Paul de Vence. And I just wondered, what would Jimmy think? Because he knew that market values, he knew that rank capitalism was overrunning everything. And now his sanctuary was being turned into luxurious apartments. It was ironic. Plus, it looked like an archaeological site.
Right.
We're excavating things.
I know, as you describe it so beautifully in the book, to know that you could actually see part of Jimmy's writing room. Correct?
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
Which was, totally extraordinary. On Jimmy's birthday, which was not too long ago, I read Quincy Troupe's last interview with Jimmy Baldwin in 1987, and he did it in that house. So reading your book and reading Quincy's interview was just such a powerful impact. He had a whole thing about whiteness, and this idea of you had to decide whether you were white or Black in this country, and then make people accept you for who you were. Talk to us about that today. I mean, we really have to say we're white or we're Black. There's nothing in between, or is there an in-between space now?
Well, you know, Carol, I think at the heart of Baldwin's corpus, whether you're reading Notes of a Native Son or Go Tell It on the Mountain, or whether you're reading The Evidence of Things Not Seen, is this revolutionary inversion, what I call this revolutionary inversion. And what do I mean by that? Is that for Jimmy, the problem isn't us. The problem isn't Black folk. The problem isn't, you know, LGBTQI. The problem isn't Muslims. The problem isn't us. The problem rests with those who are invested in this idea of whiteness, those who believe that because they're white, they ought to be valued more, that those who believe in that view, believe that advantage and disadvantage should be distributed along the lines of who's white and who's not. So the problem ain't us, he would
Right.
insist. And then he makes this distinction, I think, between white people and those who happen to be white. I love that distinction
Ah,
because I happen to love a lot of people who happen to be white, and then they're white people, right? Now, who are
right.
those people who happen to be white? Those are the folks who understand that racism comes to them as naturally as language. They understand the way in which this society has been organized, its history, and they're constantly engaged in not only deconstructing that reality, but excavating within themselves how racism has taken root. They're aware of how whiteness impacts how they see the world. And then you have those people who don't care about that. They're perfectly fine with the way in which the society is organized. If you're going to have to make a choice, it's not between white and being Black. It's a choice of whether or not you're going to be white or whether you're going to happen to be white.
Right.
And there's no middle ground there. None
Exactly.
whatsoever.
Exactly. I was interested in the book because you referred to your father, and we know that James Baldwin had a difficult relationship with his father. Can you talk a little bit, about that, working through all of that? At one
Yeah,
point, you talk about your father's, rage,
yeah.
and coming to terms with that.
Yeah, I'm from the South, I'm from Mississippi, and I've been trying to grapple with the silences, right? When there wasn't much said in our household, and when he said anything, it wasn't, I can't remember the tone outside of silence and rage, and anger. I love my father dearly. We have a wonderful relationship to this day. But as I was writing this book, I barely survived it
Mm,
because Jimmy is an exacting companion. He asks so much of you, and so I had to engage the scaffolding of my own lives, right? And part of that involved confronting that I'm a vulnerable little boy who wanted his father just to tell him that he loved
right.
him. And he scared the hell out of me as a kid. He deposited that fear in my gut, and I've been trying to prove to myself over and over again that I'm not a scared little boy. And I think by encountering that, Carol, by forcing myself to grapple with that, it changed the nature of the writing.
Hmm.
It allowed me to risk myself on the page. It allowed for my emotions to flow and for me to step outside of my academic training. And I think Baldwin was there, egging me on, kicking me in the behind, telling me to be true to myself, um, to be true with me as I was writing. Yeah.
Right. And you got it. I love you from your dad. Right. So
Oh yeah, and he always calls me every day to tell me what to say on Morning Joe or MSNBC.
that's great. That is so wonderful. So a lot has happened. It seems that everything is time is telescoped. So many changes. We've gone from still in the middle of a pandemic with really no end in sight for that. We have had a Black woman, a Black Indian woman, child of immigrants, chosen as a vice presidential candidate. Joe Biden has selected her.
Your next Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris. Kamala, the floor is yours.
Almost immediately, the backlash started, from the White House. You were one of 100 Black men who insisted that Joe Biden select a woman of color, a Black woman, as his vice presidential candidate. So how do you react when the very first things that you hear are these sexist, misogynist, racist terms coming from
Well,
the White House?
Well, I'm not surprised because he's a sexist, racist, misogynist, right? He's a vulgarian in every way that we can describe him. Um, there's nothing more stark than what we currently see. It is a politically savvy move. I thought because of the politics, it made sense to me that Vice President Biden would choose a Black woman as his running mate. And now we have this stark choice between two Americas, two worlds. We have Donald Trump and Mike Pence and what they represent. And we have the generational difference between Biden and Kamala Harris. We have the racial and ethnic difference between the two. But, I think it's very important that we not congratulate ourselves simply because we have a Black running mate, that we understand that we need to move beyond symbol, although symbol is important, to substance, because COVID-19 is destroying our community. It has destroyed our economy. This nation is teetering on a knife's edge. So we can't get caught up in the self-congratulation around identity politics. We need to understand that our communities are suffering and that we need bold policies to respond to what's happening to folk on the ground. But, we have a tendency, and we have to be careful, that some of these folk in the Democratic Party don't pat themselves on the back and check off a box and go back to business as usual. We can't allow that to happen.
Right. Speaking of business as usual, we are now some distance from the high point of the protests, the worldwide protests of millions of people, and the statues being toppled, and all of that energy. Do you see that energy focused anywhere at this point in real change? I know that we have the possibility of real change when November comes around, but in terms of that energy, where did it go?
Well, so the first thing we need to do is to ask ourselves, where was the energy before the cameras came? Right? So when we hear the phrase defund the police, many of us think, oh, they must have made that up in the context of the current protest. No. That phrase or that slogan is a reflection of longstanding organizing in the justice reinvestment movement. What we thought happened in 2014 with Black Lives Matter, that it dispersed after Ferguson and the like. No. People were still organizing. The cameras just left.
Right.
People were still mobilizing. Right. People were still engaged in local politics. So we don't have the protest in Minneapolis. We don't have the folk in the street risking their lives, although we still have Seattle and Portland. Folk are still risking their lives with the global pandemic that's killing people indiscriminately. But what the cameras have left. So what are we seeing? We're seeing organizers bringing pressure to bear on local city councils in terms of their budgeting. We see local organizers still beginning to run folk for office at the local city councils and at their county boards and the like. So what we're seeing, I think, which is really important, is that our politics isn't just simply a politics of spectacle, waiting for the cameras to show up. And once they leave, that somehow that dissipates. There's a general sense, I think, Carol, in this country that the country is broken and that people are having to work at all levels to transform this place. And so just as we saw and see in New York, just as we see in Seattle, just as we saw in Minneapolis, people are bringing pressure to bear on how the police are funded, how they're held accountable, and that hasn't ended just simply because MSNBC and CNN and other places have gone on to talk about something else.
Have gone away. But the one thing that hasn't happened is justice for Breonna Taylor. So I want you to tell me, Eddie, what is your sense of why?
I am as baffled by it as everyone else. They killed her in cold blood, and no one is being held to account. And if there is any example we need of the emptiness of having certain Black faces in high places, it's this moment, yes? When you think about who's the DA, who's not charging whom, and the like, I think the folk in Louisville must continue to bring pressure to bear, and we must continue to bring pressure to bear for justice to happen for Breonna Taylor, my Lord.
So recently I've seen, and I'm sure, as you say, the cameras were probably just not on that work, but I see the work where we know the effort to defund the police or radically change what they do and how they do it. But now we see pressure in activist groups going up that ladder. You know, who is the DA? How did that person get there? You know, what's happening? So talk to us a little bit about that we seem to focus on that street level, the street cop level, but so much wrong is happening all the way up
Oh,
to our people for sure.
absolutely. I mean, when we think about the criminal justice system, we're not just talking about police, we're talking about prosecutors, we're talking about judges, we're talking about juvenile detention centers and the like. It is the whole gamut, right? We're talking about the criminal code. It's the entire thing. And you know, people, organizations like the Color of Change, they've been organizing in order to change DAs. We saw that effect in Chicago. We saw it in St. Louis. We see it. The AG in New York, the direct district attorney
Sure.
in Philadelphia. We see this movement to change the nature of how we imagine the prosecution of the law. And I think that is a part of this groundswell, right? Because I'm a fan of Miss Ella Baker, right? We don't want to think about politics as top down, but what does it mean to imagine politics from the bottom up,
Right.
and understand that these DAs, these city council members, the local police departments, that those folk affect us immediately, and that if we just simply focus on what's going on in DC, we miss out where the actual politics hit the pavement, and that is in our local communities.
So we've got an election coming up very shortly. One of the news stories that seems to be repeating itself is that in 2016, the Black vote didn't show up. I don't know why we're being blamed for that, you know, whatever happened there. But what's your assessment of what will happen this time around? As you say, the choice is so stark, but is the motivation there?
Well, if we look at midterm elections and recent primaries, we see that the voter turnout has been historic, even in the context of COVID-19. But what we need to understand is that they're going to do everything they can to delegitimize this election. They're going to try to suppress voter turnout, and they're going to cheat. I mean, period. Let's be clear. What Donald Trump is trying to do with the United States Postal Service. My dad was a postman. I wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for what he did, over how that job that sustained us over our life, over our childhood, right? So I think at the end of the day, let me just say this, Carol: buckle up.
Yeah,
Whether he
that's good
wins
advice from Eddie
whether
Glaude
he
Jr.
wins or loses,
Right.
we are in for a time, because the peaceful transition of power will not be guaranteed. And I think for the first time in our country's history, we need to be concerned about whether he wins, and that is if he cheats, if it's legitimate, whether he loses, and whether people will assume the illegitimacy of his defeat. We are in for a time, so buckle up.
Well, thank you for that. I think you're right, absolutely. What's going on with the post office, as you say, it's just incredible. In your book, I want to get back to it, begin again.
Sure.
You look for Jimmy Baldwin's gravesite, which was not an
Yeah.
easy thing to find. Talk to us about that journey and
Yeah.
what you learned at that point.
You know, I wanted to end the book by visiting him, and you know, we went to that sprawling, you know,
Huge, enormous.
huge cemetery. Malcolm is
Right.
buried. So many folks are buried there, and I was with Carol Weinstein, who was the partner of David Baldwin and the mother of Daniel Baldwin, Jimmy's nephew. And Carol thought she could remember, but she couldn't. And you know, he was hidden in plain sight behind these young, brothers who were Latino and black and white and who were smoking some very strong weed, I must admit. And when we couldn't find him, we asked, and then they gave us the directions. And I'll never forget, because we had asked those young brothers, where did they know where the gravesite was? And they said, no. And then when I found him, they said, the brother turned around and he said, he's right there. I said, yeah, right behind you. And it seems to me that was such a moment to crystallize what I had come to understand, that he was waiting, he has been waiting for us to pass through this and waiting to see who we will be once we come out on the other side. And we're still in it. He's still waiting.
We're still in it. But as I say to him all the time when I'm talking to Jimmy, not as frequently as you do, however, I must admit, you know, I say, that's right, James Baldwin, you are absolutely right. In our closing moments, tell us what you think he was most right about.
The demand for a kind of honesty, that as long as America believes that it is an example of democracy achieved, as long as we think we're the shining city on the hill, we won't deal honestly with what we've done. So we can never release ourselves into being otherwise. America is like Never Never Land, populated by lost boys and lost girls, people who refuse to be held accountable and to hold responsibility. And so we revel in the lie, we revel in the illusion of innocence and in willful ignorance. So Jimmy's insistence that we tell the truth. And in effect, Carol, and I'll put it this way, we all can't be poets, but we damn sure all need to bear witness. And I think if we do that, then we can open the door for the country to be otherwise.
Wow. Well, Eddie Glaude Jr., thank you so much for those words, Jimmy's words and your words about our present and our future. It's the book is Begin Again, talking about James Baldwin's America and its implication for our America. Thank you for the contribution for that and so much that you do. Thank you for opening our season 6 of Black America. We're thrilled to have you here, and thank you for your words. Don't forget, people, every morning, MSNBC, if you want to know what to do that day, Eddie Glaude will tell you. Thanks for being with us, and thank you all for joining us as well. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and we'll see you the next time.